now. Mr. Hudgens, you can start now.
Okay, thank you. First of all, I want to take the opportunity to thank you for the opportunity to update the City Council on the work at the Durham Housing Authority. All of us know that 2020 has been a challenge, and probably no more so for our residents than for any other group. And clearly the problems at McDougal early in the year created a real challenge. And then on top of that, we had COVID to come along. But, and Anthony will provide you an update on all that as well as our downtown development plan. But before I turn it over to him, there are a couple of things I'd like to say. First of all, on behalf of the residents, the staff, and the board, I want to thank the City Council for their support over this past year. And during the time I've been here, and I've been involved in human services over 40 years in Durham, I've never seen a stronger partnership between the city and the Housing Authority than what we have now. And it's made it possible for us to accomplish a lot in this past 4 years since Anthony's arrived. And you'll hear about the current status of all that in just a couple of minutes. But also I'd like to talk about the partnerships and the collaboration that has helped us manage during this period of the COVID challenge, but also the problems at McDougal and our other challenges. And there's a really strong collaborative working relationship now that I think has not existed in the same way with county government, Duke, NCCU, Durham Tech, Durham Public Schools, and our nonprofits. And I'm sure I left out somebody in that group, but it's really been critically important to have that kind of collaboration if we're going to be successful in helping families succeed. And I would like to just quickly introduce the members of the Board of Commissioners. Most, if not all, are on this call. I haven't checked with everybody there, but let me just tell you who they are. George Quick is probably, he and Ms. Nottingham, Gloria Nottingham, are the two longest serving members of our board. They've been on for a full 10 years and have been involved many more years than that. I think Ms. Nottingham has been involved over 20 years with the Housing Authority. Bo Glenn has been on and off the Housing Authority board, and we figure he's got about 26 years of experience on the board of the Housing Authority and has a wealth of knowledge, historical knowledge. And our newest members are Mamie Webb Bledsoe, who's been on about a year, Christine Westfall, who's a nonprofit developer, and Mamie Webb Bledsoe actually works at Duke in their Durham Duke office. But our newest member who's on the call today is Terrell Armstrong, and this will be his first meeting. And so we welcome him to the board, and he brings a wealth of experience, both financial and with public housing. And of course, don't want to leave out Jillian Johnson. She is our liaison to the City Council and has been a valuable member. But we appreciate the opportunity to provide you with this update. We're excited about what we've accomplished. We've got some big challenges ahead, and we're just glad you're our partners. And I'm especially pleased to be able to introduce, and not that he needs any introduction, Anthony Scott, but and he will go through the program we've got, and we just look forward to hopefully having these meetings on a regular basis. And I want to just extend a welcome to your newest councilman, Mr. Freeline, to the board, and we look forward to working with him and your other 6 of you. But thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of the council, and Anthony, it's all yours.
Actually, I believe it's Mr. Mayor's.
Mr. Mayor, it's all yours. Thanks, Steve.
Thank you, Dan, and thank you, Anthony. This is great. We haven't met like this in a while, and it's really good to be doing this. And I think an annual meeting like this would be great. And I really appreciate y'all pulling this together. I want to welcome Terrell Armstrong, who we just, as you all know, colleagues, we just appointed to the board. And you're going to find that it's a great board. I was the liaison on the board for, I believe, 6 years, the Housing Authority Board, and it is just an outstanding group with an incredibly important mission. I want to second what Dan said about the close relationship we have now, and I want to give not only credit to Anthony and the staff of the Housing Authority for this close relationship, but also to our city staff, to Tom Bonfield, Keith Chadwell, Reginald Johnson, Karen Lotto, Terry Porter Holmes, all the people in our community development department who have really worked to make this a cooperative relationship. And under Keith's leadership, this has been, I think, really successful. And we've had a lot of bumps in the road. We've got a lot of difficult challenges, but I think that with the bond issue having passed, with our support that we are giving already, Anthony's going to outline the support that we're already giving in so many ways, and the support that we've committed to give through the bond campaign to the Housing Authority. It's very exciting. It's going to make an enormous difference in the lives of thousands of people. And so I'm really pleased to be here to see all the folks from the Durham Housing Authority Board, and I'll now turn it over to Anthony.
Actually, I believe Mr. Reginald Johnson is up next.
I'll turn it over to Reginald.
All right, well, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Can everyone hear me? Great. So good morning, and first of all, I bring you greetings on behalf of the City of Durham Community Development Department. I'm Reginald Johnson, Director of the Department of Community Development, Community Development Department. I'm joined this morning by Terry Porter Holmes and Karen Lotto, Assistant Directors, as well as Matthew Walker, who is the multifamily team leader, and all of this work related to the Housing Authority and development falls into his leadership and his team. I do want to thank the commissioners for being here, as well as the council members, Mayor and Mayor Pro Tem, and also want to welcome on behalf of the Community Development Department, our newest council member Freelon. Welcome. We're glad to have you in our service, be in your service. Understanding is we may be working closely together on some matters, so greatly appreciate that. My task before you this morning is to generally provide you with an overview with a little bit of details and some context. And I guess I say I'm paving the way for the main event, which is Mr. Scott. But just want to provide a little details and some context with that. And, you know, Madam Clerk, if you can put up the presentation. Thank you so very much. I would just say we're glad to be here, and this is a good meeting, and I'm looking forward to the discussion. Next slide. The first thing, in terms of my overview and some key points, I only have about 5 slides, is to unequivocally state that the city is committed to supporting financially and with expertise DHA's effort to rehabilitate existing public housing and create new affordable housing opportunities in Durham. I've said many times, even before the bond referendum, that, you know, if one has a goal of increasing and improving affordable housing, one can't do it without being in partnership with the Housing Authority, because the Housing Authority serves so many of our most vulnerable populations in the city of Durham. And so from the city's point of view, which we have a broad way of looking at affordable housing, one can't do it without, you can't work around the Housing Authority. You have to go work with the Housing Authority to be successful. Our intention is to be successful. Another key point is that the city and DHA are committed to the MDWBE participation goals for the DHA downtown and neighborhood plan projects, the DDNP projects. The city actually just released a RFP on MDWBE to bring in a consultant. That's was released on the 28th. And so the Housing Authority has been instrumental in helping us with that. We'll serve on the review panels with that. And so that is a goal for both of us. I would just also like to share for benefit of everyone, and this is a reminder for some, maybe new information for others, that the DHA and the city are partners on some non-development related areas such as the creation of a pilot employment and training program for DHA residents targeting jobs on construction trades. We're working with Office of Economic and Workforce Development on that as well, and DHA and Community Development Department. And also, DHA works with us in the dissemination of HUD funds through the Housing Opportunities for Persons with AIDS program. They're one of our sponsors. So this has nothing to do with development, does have to do with affordable housing, but we are partners, and DHA is one of our key partners. And next slide. As it relates to development efforts, city support for DHA's development efforts, I just want to share briefly, many of you know the names, but just to give a broad overview, in terms of the Laurel Oaks, which is the 30 units, the city investment is $800,000. Understand that when we talk about investments, our role is gap financing. So usually we're providing or filling some gap, and the main part of the project's financing comes from other places. J.J. Henderson Tower Rehab, 178 units. We're contributing 2.9 million. J.J. Henderson New Construction, 80 units. We're contributing 3 million. The McDougal Terrace electrical upgrades, we talked about that earlier in the spring, for about 360 units, 1.4 million. And then the Elizabeth Street new construction, the first phase of the main Liberty Street redevelopment, 1.1 million. And subsequent phases of the East Main and Liberty Street redevelopment, we're setting aside 14.2 million. Then on other related matters, we're providing operational support for the DD&P. And that's the total of 1.9, just under $2 million. And then we're providing relocation assistance for the DD&P, and that's 700,000. And so this list is, they're in different stages, but this is definitely money that we have earmarked or is in process already under contract, and some of it has been already expended for the Housing Authority, or we processing contracts, preparing contracts. Next slide. Just to provide a overall context, and when we talk about affordable housing, it's not just the development, it's not just the Housing Authority. It does include other aspects of affordable housing. I just wanted to make sure that for the commissioners, as well as our new council member and anyone in the public, to appreciate that we don't just have work with the Housing Authority, but there are other things that we're doing. So in terms of homelessness, the council has approved COVID-19 money, $602,000 for emergency response and support, rapid rehousing, emergency shelter for medical and vulnerable. We've opened an RFP in the amount of $538,000 in city and federal funds for rapid rehousing and emergency shelter. We've launched the Unsheltered Coordinating Agency that's funded with $537,000 of city funds over the next 2.5 years for outreach case management for the unsheltered and literally homeless households. And we have over $500,000 a year in ongoing city support for coordinated entry, landlord engagement, and the homeless management information system related to homelessness. And in terms of multifamily rental, we just issued RFP that closed, and we're in the process now, which will result in over $10 million in contracts in the pipeline for more than 250 new and preserved units as a result of the recently completed RFP. We'll be coming to council with an update for that the next few cycles. Next slide. And then on the neighborhood stabilization side, we've executed emergency rental contracts with Durham County Department of Social Services and of $1 million as part of the COVID response. We've opened RFP, we'll open RFP on $700,000 for minor repair and intake for substantial home rehabilitation work over the next 2 years. We funded a second year of eviction diversion of $500,000 contract with Legal Aid of North Carolina. And we have a $1 million contract with DCLT in process for the second phase of the East Durham redevelopment, and an RFP for the third-party administrator for a down payment assistance program expected to be issued at the end of this year, calendar year. And we have multiple RFPs underway to start up the lead remediation program, the grant that we received from $3 million grant we received from the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development. And so I'll conclude with that. Next slide. Conclude with that just to give us an overview, some detail, some context for this discussion. And, I'll entertain any questions, Mr. Mayor and Mr. Chair. But if there are none, then I'll turn it over to the main event, which is Mr. Scott.
I don't see any questions, Reginald, but can I just comment that I'm so proud of this. Reginald and council colleagues, when you think where we were, I guess, 5 years ago, Reginald, 6 years ago, when we were just beginning the dedicated funding source, first penny for housing, and how we have been able to turn this into a really great program of support for affordable housing all across the spectrum, from homelessness all the way up through the low-income housing tax credit projects. It's very exciting, and to see all these RFPs coming to fruition, to see the homelessness support we've been able to give, and we've ramped that up so high. And I just want to thank you, Reginald. I want to thank the members of your staff and Keith for making all this happen. So I really
You're
appreciate it.
welcome. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
All right, if you're all ready for me, if you could please pull up my presentation, please. While that's happening, I wanted to thank you, Mr. Mayor and Mayor Pro Tem, all members of the council, and a special welcome to our newest council member, Pierce Freelon. It's a pleasure to have you join the city council staff, or city council, I should say. And this is probably my last opportunity in a public forum anyway, to be in a meeting that includes Tom Bonfield. I just wanted to say a few things about him and my 4 years here. I've worked in a few cities throughout my career, and your leadership, City Manager Bonfield, is the best I've seen from a top city administrator. Your commitment to Durham's low-income citizens is always been supportive. It's always been encouraging and refreshing. And the seeds that you have planted in your role and the relationship with the Housing Authority will serve the city for decades to come. And it's just amazing to see what happens when you have good, strong leadership and commitment to see a brighter future for DHA and for our families that we represent. So enjoy your next stage there, Tom. And I look forward to occasionally bending your ear in the future.
Thank you, Anthony. And the smile on my face is thinking about that next phase of enjoyment, but certainly I am very proud of the work that I've been involved in, but really that the council has supported, and that the city staff under Keith Chadwell and Reginald Johnson and others have really helped the city think through very important issues with our relationships with Durham Housing Authority. And I am extremely proud of where we are, and am excited about the update today that could happen before I transition out of the city manager's office. So thank you very much, and I plan on being around and keeping an eye on things. So keep moving forward. Thank you.
Yes, sir. So with that, next slide, please. I want to cover today a very high-level overview of DHA, McDougal Terrace update, COVID-19, RAD in multiple fashions. Talk a little bit about our partnership with Habitat, and then also just to speak to some of the agency challenges to come. Next slide, please. So firstly, just to give a large scale picture of who DHA is and who we serve. We essentially serve about 10,000 individuals, and those are split up to include both the public housing program, those are the hard units that we own and manage, and then the Housing Choice Voucher Program. So as you can see, we have about a little over 1,600 families on the public housing side. And that number is actually a little higher. And we have about 2,800 vouchers in our voucher program. And right now we have about 25 or 2,600 families, just like it's a little bit outdated. And so it is a large number of residents that we serve in our DHA families. That average is about 2.1 people per household and an income of just over $13,000 when you combine both the voucher and the public housing program. And the rents paid by those families is less than $300 per month. And 38% of our households actually have earned income. Next slide, please. And just to break that down a little bit more in terms of age, you can see that half of our population is minors, kids that are 17 and under. And if you also, I was involved now with the Durham Children's Initiative, where there's a special effort they have around kids from 0 to 8 years old. So when you look at the number of kids that we have that are 0 to 8 years old, 21% of our youth are actually in that category. So we do have a lot of residents, and a lot of those residents, almost half of them are actually children under 17 or under 18 years of age. Next slide, please. So a quick update on McDougall Terrace. As you all recall, January 3rd, we began evacuating families out of McDougall Terrace. And that evacuation, in terms of when people finally came back and the work was complete, ended on May 3rd with our last family moving back then. The work that we undertook included replacing the existing venting systems for the hot water heaters and the furnaces. It included installing new furnaces that included thermostats and replacing gas stoves with electric ones for most of the units, which also required us to upgrade our electricity. We added safety devices to the water heaters, and we also addressed a number of environmental concerns, including mold remediation and insect infestation and some other hazards that came about through the work from our city's NIS department, as well as the building and inspections department. The interesting thing about this, of course, is you see the dates. We all were impacted by COVID-19 starting directly in March. So that actually overlapped with our efforts going on in McDougall Terrace. As a result of that, we halted the switching of gas stoves to electric stoves because we did not want to have people in hotels. Basically, we are required to shut down the electricity for between 3 and 5 days to do this changeover of electricity, which means those families have to go into hotels. We do not want to have families in hotels during this COVID crisis, so we decided to halt that work. So there are about 136 units remaining that have to have upgrades to electricity and convert the gas stoves to electric stoves. The units that do have gas stoves, though, were given new stoves, new gas stoves in the interim. That also, the COVID impact was that during that time, we also halted all routine work orders, and we only focused on emergency and urgent work orders. And that was to comply with the need to have PPE, and I'll talk a little bit more about that when I talk about COVID-19. Next slide, please. Next. So with respect to the COVID-19 impact on our operations, we began to do some initial planning around this in February, actually. And we created an in-house task force to kind of look at what this may mean if this was to impact us the way it has in other parts of the country or the world. So what we concluded is that in March, we actually started shifting to having people work from home who could. Later in March, and this was in compliance with the orders that came from the mayor, of course, and the governor, we actually closed our offices to the public. And again, we were only performing emergency and urgent work orders during that time. We also set up what we call the reverse call center. So what we did was had staff, particularly those that were working from home, we had them reach out to our residents on a weekly basis. They would call residents. It started out with our seniors, particularly 2-3 times a week. checking in on them to make sure that they were getting access to food, access to their medication, or any other issues that they might have, so that we could connect them to assistance either directly through us or through some of our partner entities out there. Next, please. We also, during that time, began to order PPE, which included obviously masks, gloves. We purchased thermometers that we can install in our offices, and also Tyvek suits, so that we could get to a point of doing routine work orders in our units, whereas we might not have residents be able to leave the unit, but we could still go in and actually conduct routine work orders. We also began to identify office modifications that we would need to do, and began to do that, such as plexiglass shields, putting 6-foot distance, social distancing stickers down, and also doing some modifications to our main building central office, where we'll be able to set up booths that will allow the social distancing necessary to process applications and other types of inquiries. In June, we reopened our offices in a limited capacity, and we only are allowing people to see our residents via appointment only, again, to minimize exposure. In July, we began our partnership with DPS to ensure that we could do everything possible to make sure that our kids were getting access to computers, the hotspots, and I should also mention that the high-speed internet installation that you all supported as city council members, we are very, very excited about this. This is an effort that actually started as a part of the Connect Home program, even before I got here to DHA. And so we are extremely grateful to have the ability to have an internet network that will be able to cover our top 6 or 7 communities that have school-age children. So they'll have free high-speed wireless internet. That's underway right now. We expect that to be done, I believe, in the next month or two, that all of those communities will in fact have that free internet access. And this past month, once we finally got in our additional PPE, we were able to begin routine work orders as well. Next slide, please. We'll talk about Rental Assistance Demonstration, or RAD. And RAD, as you all may know, certainly most of you know, that this is it's considered still a demonstration program that in essence switches the public housing assistance that we get to support our operations to a housing choice voucher assistance. And the reason why this is such an exciting opportunity for housing authorities across the country is that the public housing assistance that we get, and when I say assistance, this is the subsidy that we receive that pays for repairs, it pays for staffing, it pays for utilities. It's the ongoing operations of the property. Those dollars historically have been up and down at best. And over the last 15, 20 years, we've been funded at a rate that's somewhere around 80% or so. So we've been getting less and less money in order to operate our properties properly over the last 20 years or so. The Housing Choice Voucher Program, on the other hand, and we think this is primarily because it is a private sector-based program. It is the largest assistance program that the federal government offers. It's been getting its necessary funding at about 99% on average. So the idea around RAD is twofold. One is to come out of the existing public housing program funding source and move to the Housing Choice Voucher funding source so that the stability of the funding is more likely to occur year after year. Many people don't realize, but we get funded each year, and it's through congressional appropriations on an annual basis, and that's when we know how much money we're going to actually get in our budget year. So for example, we are hearing that there's going to be a continuing resolution for the upcoming fiscal year. And that means that they'll continue the funding that we receive from the current fiscal year into the next fiscal year. So we have no idea what our actual budget might end up becoming in 2021. And this is one of the challenges that you face with our annual funding that we receive as a housing authority. The RAD program also brings in another important element, and that is the ability for public housing to use financing tools that is not currently available. In essence, it allows us to be able to use bank financing, low-income housing tax credits, things of that nature that we can use to help pay for the renovation or redevelopment of our communities. Next slide, please. So our approach using RAD, and by the way, RAD has kind of four different approaches, and we're using all four. One is what's called a straight conversion. That is, we will simply switch the subsidy that we're receiving on the public housing program over to the housing choice voucher program. We've done that with the Goalie Point development, or in process of doing that with the Goalie Point development. Edgemont Elms, it has been done already. And the 4 Hope 6 deals that we've done, it's been done with those. The Main Street Townhomes, Holman Homes, I listed that twice, my apologies. Calvert Place, and the other site, which draws me a blank right now, my apologies for that. But the 4 Hope 6 sites all have done this straight conversion. So now the public housing units that we have in those developments are already receiving our subsidy through the Housing Choice Voucher Program. And by the way, I should mention, it doesn't change rents that people are paying. It's still based on 30% of their income. They still have all of their protections that they had as a public housing resident. And all those things are built into the RAD law. It's not a choice the DHA gets to make, not that we want to change that, but it's built into the law of the RAD program. The other approach is rehab. And we're doing that with Daymar Court, Maureen Rose, and Laurel Oaks. Those 3 properties are having substantial rehab done to those. Daymar Court, which is actually finished. Laurel Oaks, as was mentioned previously by Reginald Johnson, is underway right now with the rehab for that. And Maureen Road is also, it's basically complete. And the issue with Maureen Road is that we discovered that there is a plumbing problem there that wasn't built into the original scope of work. So even though we thought we were done with Maureen, we have to go back and do some additional work on the plumbing there. And we'll talk more about that at another time, but that is a major setback for us on that development because we were ready to occupy all the units there. We currently have a bid out now to get plumbing bids for that to determine what the cost will be. But we have to go in and replace that piping in there that handles the sewer. This was not originally in the scope of work. Unfortunately, it was something that was, I guess, overlooked by the architect that they didn't think was necessary. But after we've done the work there, we know that there's definitely something that we have to go in and fix. We don't want to have people in the units and then have some sort of plumbing issue. Laurel Oaks, as I mentioned, is underway right now. It has, it's about $1.6 million in total. As was mentioned by Reginald Johnson, half of that is coming from the city. The other half, DHA is contributing to the renovation of that development. The next item, our next approach is redevelopment itself, which is the tear down and rebuild of those public housing communities. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in just a second when we talk about DDNP. And lastly is what's called transfer of assistance. And that is where we take the subsidy that we're receiving for those units and we transfer it to another property. Excuse me. We're doing that at the Willard Street property, which is being developed by DHIC in partnership with Self-Help. We are transferring 21 units from a public housing site to the Willard Street site. They will be essentially RAD public housing units now in Willard Street. So residents, 21 families will have an opportunity to live in a brand new affordable housing development, but staying right here in the downtown area. Next slide, please. DDNP, or DHA's Downtown and Neighborhood Plan. This is a rather bold and ambitious plan focused on the 5 DHA properties in the downtown area, plus 2 city-owned properties as well. This will take essentially 447 existing units and return almost 2,500 units to that site. It will have a variety of income ranges. It will replace all of the 447 units that are going to be torn down. In fact, some of those in J.J. Henderson are not going to be torn down at all. They're going to be actually renovated. It's got an estimated completion timeline of 10 years and an estimated budget of $500 million. Next slide, please. I'm going to give you all an update Next slide, please. An update of where we are with this overall plan. So this shows you those 7 properties and what they would look like once they are completely built. And I should caution everyone that these plans may change as we get to the development of each site, but these are viable plans that were developed with financing plans with our partners, EJP, and they are our development consultants that have been working with us on these developments. We are excited about what this will mean for Durham and how it will bring not only affordable housing, but affordable housing at different levels, as well as some market rate housing, retail, commercial space, and new quality open space. Next slide, please. So this is what those 7 sites look like over time in terms of budget and number of units. So you can see that the first phase of this, and these are listed by phase, the first phase of this is J.J. Henderson. J.J. Henderson has 2 phases to it. It is a renovation of the existing building, plus the building of a brand new construction building on the same J.J. Henderson site. And I talked about this being a 10-year development program. The primary reason this is going to be 10 years is because each one of these phases has at least 1 9% low-income housing tax credit development in it. Why that's important is because the low-income housing tax credit program in the state of North Carolina, Durham only can get 1 per year. So even if we wanted to do more phases that involve 9%, we can only do 1 per year at this time. And we're going to work real hard to try to get that to change. But right now, that's pretty much the way the state of North Carolina implements the low-income housing tax credit program. That necessitates us having to have a 10-year build out because we have 10 years of 9% deals in this, but not all. As you can see, there are 17 phases altogether. So we'll be able to do multiple phases at a time. But in terms of that 9% piece, which is important for the affordability of the development, we have to apply each year and hope that we'll get a 9% phase. And you'll see in the red box, the Liberty Street and what we now call 519 East Main DHA office site and the Forest Hill Heights are all sites that are targeted for the bond, the recently passed, well, not so recent, it's almost a year now, the housing bond program that passed last November. Next slide, please. So a little bit on where we are with DDMP. Next slide. So as I mentioned, J.J. Henderson is going to be 2 phases now instead of just 1. So we're going to do the renovation of the existing J.J. Henderson building, which is on the left. Excuse me, yes, on the left side. So we're going to do a complete renovation of that building from top to bottom. On the right side is a brand new construction building of 80 units. In both of these sites will be targeted for our senior population. The approval for both of these is already in hand. We expect that construction will begin on both of these sites in the spring of 2021. Next slide, please. This is a rendering of what the new construction building will look like. And you kind of see just in the middle there, you see the existing J.J. Henderson building kind of peeking up, almost looking like a chimney. But you can just get a sense of from that vantage point what the new building will look like in relationship to the old. Next slide, please. Next slide. So the next phase of our DDMP is the Liberty and 519 East Main Street site. And I just want to say a few words about Liberty and 519 while we're saying 519 East Main Street. Our board of directors has removed the name of Odom Towers from the 519 East Main Street development because historical records show that Harvey S. Odom Sr., who used to be one of the early executive directors of the Housing Authority, was known to have racist tendencies as well as having some very disrespectful ways in which he treated DHA residents during his tenure of leading the Housing Authority. And we, the board, decided that it was not in the best interest of Durham or fully representative of who DHA is today, that his name ought to be carried on that building. So that name has been removed, and we forevermore will be referring to that as 519 East Main Street until such time that we are replacing that former building, that 519 East Main Street building. So this shows you the Liberty and 519 East Main Street site. The small inset on the right shows you what the site looks like now. And what you see before you is the current preliminary site plan. We are very excited to be able to report that phase 1 has been funded by a 9% tax credit, or has been awarded a 9% tax credit. And it is the first 9% of our overall plan that we have, that we won, and we're very excited about this. So that will be the first phase of the rebuilding of this site. There'll be more on this as we continue the work on it, but at this point, we are very excited about that. That's what's known as, in this slide, it shows as 2A. That's where that building will be located. And you can see throughout, there's going to be up to 5 additional phases. This, again, is subject to change. This is what the site plan looks like. You'll see there's plenty of open space. There's parking on site, and we will continue to refine this for the better as time goes on. But right now, we're really excited to report that there'll be 72 brand new affordable units on this site to start construction next year. Next slide, please. Also want to mention the idea of what we call shared prosperity. We've heard a lot about this term in the last year or so, and DHA is very committed to making sure that with this $500 million of development activity, that we ensure that Durhamites get an opportunity to take full advantage of that. We have 2 development partners right now. One is called Laurel Street Residential. They are doing both the new construction on JJ Henderson and the new construction of the 518 East Main Street site. They have committed to the MBE goals that you see here, 30% for WMBE. They're going to be working with local MBE organizations. And part of what that means is looking at how do we waive or reduce bonding requirements or insurance liability, and on dealing with the ongoing challenge as a smaller contractor. How do you carry what might be 45 days before you're paid for the work that you do? All key things that tend to be barriers that allows more WMBE contractors and subcontractors to be a part of a development like this. These are commitments that have been made by both our development partners to date, and we'll require it of all our development partners going forward. Next slide. The other component of this is also focusing on local hiring. Reginald Johnson mentioned the partnership between the Community Development Department, the Office of Workforce and Economic Development, and DHA on making sure that we can include actual training programs within the work that we're doing so that we will have a ready workforce. We've been talking with our development partners on this and making sure that their general contractors are providing us with information on the kinds of hiring they need to do, and we'll try to train to hire for those positions, as well as other activities and programs that we have going on within DHA to see if we can do the same thing. We think that this is not just about housing, but this is also an opportunity to implement economic development for residents of Durham as well. Next slide, please. One of the things that we frankly, we haven't talked a lot about is this partnership with Habitat for Humanity and DHA. And City Manager Bonfield, I remember the very first National Night Out. We were there at the Franklin Village, and we were standing there, and you looked over to me and you says, "Anthony, we need to do something about those lots over there." And I said, "Yes, sir, we'll work on that." Unfortunately, it is taking us a very long time to get there, but we're happy to report that Habitat for Humanity became our partner on the development of these 37 lots. Those 37 lots will become 37 affordable homeownership units. And I'm also pleased to say that I believe, what is the date now? September 18th will be the very first homeowner being welcomed to their new home. So there should be a notice about that coming out. Hopefully you guys will be able to attend. It's going to be a virtual kind of thing, I believe. That's at 3 p.m. on September 18th. We'll actually have our very first homeowner step into their home on that date. So we're excited that we've been able to be a part of homeownership. It's not something that we talk about a great deal because it's not really our wheelhouse. We'll move to more of that in the future. We've been focused on the rental side because those are the properties that we have, but homeownership, especially affordable homeownership in a city like Durham, is absolutely critical, and we want to support that in any way that we can. Next slide, please. So I want to talk a little bit about some of the challenges that we have at DHA. Beyond some of the things that you guys have heard about, but one of the things, of course, is how are we working with our residents that are unable to pay their rent through loss of income. We put in place a policy change back in the summer of 2019. We've done some modifications of that as well in terms of what we call now the Housing Stability Program. And essentially, it's an eviction prevention program. And it pretty much picks up from where we were last summer, where we're emphasizing to all of our DHA residents that if you are having problems paying your rent, or if you have a loss of income, then let DHA know so that we can make arrangements so that we will not have to file for eviction for non-payment of rent. Now that's in general. I should point out that you all are aware that the HUD had put out a moratorium on evictions through July 24th. Well, since that time, the Center for Disease Control has also put out a moratorium on evictions that runs through the end of this calendar year. We feel strongly, though, that we didn't need either of those because the policies that we have in place would achieve the same thing. The one thing that we continue to emphasize, though, that it's a moratorium on evictions. It does not excuse the rental amount that's due during this period. So we want to make sure that people work with us so we can work with them and we can avoid the unnecessary process of filing for evictions. Obviously, we won't be doing that anyway in 2020. In fact, we haven't done any in 2020. I want to make that clear as well. We haven't filed for evictions for non-payment of rent at all in 2020. But with the moratoriums that exist, we won't do that anyway. But we want to make sure that residents don't just stop paying rent for no reason. To make sure that they are in touch with us. The guidelines by the CDC give very specific reasons as to why you qualify for that. And we just want to make sure that everyone who hears this emphasizes to any resident that is having problems paying their rent to work with us. We can work with you. We have partnerships with DSS, some ecumenical communities as well. Next, on our capital projects. Stay on that same slide, please. Thank you. We have started the roof replacement at Hoover Road in Cornwallis. Those are two properties in which we had significant issues of water leakage. The construction on those has finally begun. On Laurel Oaks, I mentioned earlier, it's going through a RAD conversion. And then overall, we talk a lot about DDNP and the downtown sites. We are also, in fact, had it not been for COVID, we expected before the end of the year to have had a overall portfolio-wide plan. Now, this is something that we've always been working on and we sort of always had, but we need to make sure that we're refining that based on the resources that are available, based on the likelihood of how we'll be able to do that in conjunction with other development activities that's going on. So this includes, what are we going to do about the renovation or redevelopment of a Cornwallis, McDougal Terrace, an Oxford Manor, scattered sites, etc. We want to have a fully worked out plan for all of our communities because the goal here is to convert all of those communities to RAD developments so that we can come up with the necessary resources we need to either rebuild those communities or do a substantial renovation of those communities so that they will be safe, decent housing for decades to come. And lastly, I wanted to talk about, on this slide, troubled agency status. As you all know, in 2018, we were designated as troubled. We were previously substandard, which meant we were right on the edge. And then 2018, we became designated as what's called a troubled agency. And that's a designation, and it's specifically associated with the fact of our poor scores on our inspections. So we are working diligently to get those things addressed. You know, part of some of the challenges we found at McDougal, beyond the carbon monoxide issue, certainly exposed a lot of that. And so we've been working diligently on that. But we have a plan that we'll be releasing probably in the next month or so that talks about how we're going to be addressing all of our backlog and work orders, particularly under COVID-19, and how do we make sure that we are improving how we are doing our repairs at our various properties. It is not something that we find acceptable at all, or I find acceptable, certainly not my board. And we want to make sure that we turn around that troubled agency status for 2021. We would like to have been in a position to say we want to do that for 2020, but unfortunately, as I mentioned, we had to stop all of our routine work orders because of the COVID-19 situation. And not only that, HUD has declared that it's not going to be doing scoring for the work orders and the performance of the properties in 2020. So even if we were in a position to actually have scoring done, HUD is not performing any scoring, and they're not going to do any probably until the spring of 2021. But we're confident that we'll be ready, our units will be ready, and our troubled agency, our troubled agency status will in fact be converted back to standard. Next slide, please. Other things I wanted to mention is that DHA has 3 OIG audits. One goes back to 2004 and came out in 2005. And this particular audit says that the Housing Authority is required to repay approximately $3.6 million over 100 years. We have been doing that since this agreement was reached, which I think was around 2014. It was actually a little bit before my time. And the HUD has come back and said that the guidance that we received from our field office out of Greensboro was incorrect. And we have to sort of redo the agreement that we had. But that's a minor issue in the scheme of things. The bigger issue is that when you see it says that we have to repay this money, we have to repay this money to our public housing program. And it has to be paid by non-federal dollars. So there's some funding that we get from the federal government that is declared non-federal, right? It's money that comes in as an administrative way. So we've been paying on this through those non-federal dollars. The problem is that as we implement RAD, we are reducing our public housing inventory. And we're not reducing the units, I want to make that clear. We're just reducing what is called public housing because remember, we're putting in the RAD program. And so it no longer is considered public housing. And so HUD became alarmed and said, well, you have to come up with a more aggressive plan to repay this $3.6 million because you are reducing your public housing inventory as you convert units to RAD. So one of the things that we were able to work out with HUD is to say, look, in our conversion of these properties from public housing to RAD, we're using non-federal dollars in doing so. Can that count towards this $3.6 million? And they said, yes, it does. So the funding, for example, that we're receiving from the city for the J.J. Henderson development and Laurel Oaks, and even the $1.4 million for McDougal, are all eligible dollars to be counted towards this $3.6 million for that OIG outstanding audit. So we're making the necessary agreements with HUD and DHA, as well as we'll need some assistance from you all in terms of just language changes in agreements and arrangements that have already been made, just to ensure HUD that yes, these funds will come to the Housing Authority and they'll be used for RAD development, and that'll allow us to essentially apply those funds towards this $3.6 million and get that OIG audit cleared once and for all. Similarly, there are 2 OIG audits that were done for the Housing Choice Voucher Program that were issued in 2016. Again, this is just before my arrival. And those will require DHA to pay those over the next 5 years. Again, we were already paying these from 2016 until now, but the guidance that we got from one branch of HUD says, no, you didn't do that the right way. So now we have to sort of redo it all over again. but that's fine. But those are the 3 OIG audits that we have outstanding that we're working on, and we've never been out of compliance with our repayment on those. But it is causing a little bit of a change because of the fact that we are reducing our public housing inventory to be included in RAD. And lastly, and this gets to this, the RAD conversion is requiring us to be more aggressive with the repayment plan. So that's actually was explained in the previous bullet. Next slide, please, which I believe is the last one. And at this point, I'll just open it up for anyone who has questions for me. So thank you all. Okay, great. Thank you all. All right,
I see
Mr. Miller, back to
Councilmember
you.
Reese.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I had something for Director Scott, if that's okay.
Absolutely.
Great, thank you. Director Scott, thank you for being with us and for all the work that you've done, especially over the last, I guess, year or so. Really one of the most challenging years for our housing authority, certainly since I've been on the council. You mentioned that non-essential work orders, that I don't think non-essential is the word you used. You said non-essential work orders. Routine work orders have been delayed while we're in this kind of public health emergency. Is that right?
That is correct. And that's actually what virtually every housing authority across the country is in the same position. Sorry, go ahead.
Does that include things like mowing the grass?
No, we have contractors who are mowing the grass for DHA.
Okay. Received a message from one of the residents of McDougal Terrace who was concerned about that. So I wanted to put that on your radar. Also to get a timeline from you on when you think the repairs at McDougal Terrace are going to be complete. It wasn't clear to me from your presentation whether those are also being held, being delayed by the public health emergency, but just wanted to get some clarity on that.
Are you referring to the electrical repairs and replacement?
Yes.
So we have, we've sort of been careful because of the uptick that we've seen in the COVID situation. We're going to huddle about that this month to see if we think it's safe and ready. One of the things that's going to be clear for us is that we've got to make sure that all of our residents are in agreement, because you have several apartments in a building. And if you have a family that says they're just not comfortable with going to a hotel for 3 to 5 days because of this COVID situation, then we won't be able to do the work at all. And so that's been part of the hesitancy. One, just knowing what the COVID-19 emergency has meant for people. And then two, knowing that all of our residents are going to have to be out of each of those buildings when we go to shut them down. So we'll do two things in terms of starting to do outreach with residents in the next month to see if they're comfortable with doing a 3 to 5 day hotel stay. We also need to reach out to the contractor to see what his ramp up is like, and whether he'll be able to kind of get all of his workers back in place and that sort of thing. So it will have to be a bit of a coordinated effort.
So does that mean that those repairs have to be done on a building by building basis and not a unit by unit basis?
That's correct, because you have to shut down the power in the entire building.
Right, got it. Okay, that makes sense, but that makes it a lot harder. Totally understand that.
Yes.
One other question from the chat. If council members receive questions about from individual families in DHA housing that have specific questions about their units, what's the best way for council members to get that information into DHA? Probably texting you is not really the best strategy, although it's certainly the one I've employed thus far. But maybe there's a better way to do that. And I want to give you a chance to tell all of us about that now.
Right. If you feel it's urgent, certainly text or call. That's first. But you can contact Tawan Fields, who was on the last slide, her email there. It's tfields@dha-nc.org, because she keeps me on track and makes sure that I can follow up on various items.
Great. Thank you very much, Director Scott. I appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thank you.
Other questions, colleagues? Any other questions? So I have a couple, Anthony. One is regarding, I think it would be good to explain a little bit more about the low-income housing tax credits and why the 4%, a little about the 9%, kind of what our situation is with JJ. We didn't get the 9%. We're using the 4, hence more city money being needed. And how you mentioned that we have been engaged, actually, you and I and others have been engaged in an effort to try to get Durham to have more ability to get 9% credits. But if you could maybe talk about a little about some of that effort, since that's also crucial to our ability to build affordable housing.
Sure. So there are two types of low-income housing tax credits. One is called the 4%, and one is the 9%. The 4% tax credit is essentially about half the assistance that you get. And that is non-competitive. There's plenty of volume, if you will, that the state has to do those deals. But as I mentioned, you don't get the same amount of money that you would for the 9%. So that means you typically are going to have a bigger gap. The 9% tax credit in North Carolina, the North Carolina Housing Finance Agency, which administers the program, has developed a whole system statewide in terms of how they're going to distribute these awards. And they've determined that Durham only gets 9% a year max. Now, we can get none, but we certainly can't get more than 1. Part of what we've tried to do is try to get the Housing Finance Agency to think differently about this, particularly since you have a housing authority that is being very forward thinking. It's got a larger development plan. It's not just kind of a one-off, there's a deal over here we might do, or somebody comes along, there's a deal over there. But we have a very strategic approach to how we want to do affordable housing development. And we think that warrants the state looking at how they distribute those 9% a little bit differently. Now, there's a lot of politics and that sort of thing, of course, which I won't get into, and I won't even pretend to know them all. But that has created one of the bigger challenges of us being able to do more. So I'll give you an example. A colleague of mine in Texas, he was able to get the state legislature to approve 9% tax deals for the large scale plan that they have. So that all the tax credit deals that they're going to do will actually be done for the El Paso Housing Authority, because he had a very wide-ranging strategic plan in which to do that. That has allowed him to convert all of their public housing into RAD deals in a span of about 4 years. And they have 6,000 units in El Paso. So they were able to do more in less time than what we'll be able to do as a housing authority. So it is possible. There are other housing finance agencies that are being more creative in supporting larger scale plans by housing authorities, but our housing finance agency is not yet there. You mentioned the 4%. So we applied for 9% for the J.J. Henderson new construction last year. We were unsuccessful in winning that award. We came back to the city and asked, is it possible to get additional support so that we can keep the rehab and that new construction on schedule to continue to move forward? Otherwise, both projects would be delayed because there's some integrated kind of site work and what have you that has to be done. But when you don't get that 9%, you are really essentially losing about half of the support you would normally get through that tax credit program if you have to go to a 4%. Hope that was helpful.
Thank you very much, Anthony. I wanted to highlight that, colleagues, because when I think about one of the things that we need to be putting on our legislative agenda, hopefully we get a new legislature, that we will this is the kind of thing that I think we need to be thinking about for our housing agenda. So I wanted to just add that. We have good friends at the Durham, good friends at the Housing Finance Agency Board now, but we need some different legislation to help us. Other questions or comments for Mr. Scott? All right. Thank you. Thank you, Anthony, for a great report. It's exciting. It's amazing what we're going to be able to do in the next 10 years. And
Mr. Mayor, I don't know if you can hear me.
yes, we can, Councilmember. Go ahead.
I apologize. I am in the car. I just wanted to follow up and note, as you were saying, that the goals that were aligned in this project, in that project, the MWBE goals around 30%, and the local hiring goals, I'm hoping that we're going to also have conversations with staff about how we align along these lines of making sure that we're doing the same thing within the city. So I just wanted to make sure I raised that point. I couldn't type that fast enough.
Yes, thank you for that. If I could respond, Mr. Mayor.
Absolutely.
This is something that we, as I mentioned, we take very seriously, and we want to create a reporting out around that. So at minimum on a quarterly basis, we're going to be able to track how well we're doing on that. That's something we're going to require of our development partners to make sure that it's not one of those at the end of the project you look back and go, well, we only hired 3 people or something like that. We want to make sure that that is an ongoing reporting effort throughout and during the development itself.
Thank you. Any more questions? Councilmember Caballero?
Just out of curiosity, are we going to be having these types of meetings more frequently? I know there was conversation around that during the McDougal Terrace evacuation, and I'm glad that we are doing this now. And so just curious about kind of the thoughts around that.
We were thinking about an annual meeting,
Okay.
Making this an annual affair. If we need more, we can certainly do it.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. All right, Dan, I think it's back to you. Is that correct?
I'm not sure, but thanks for the opportunity. And I would love to see this done on an annual basis at least. I think it's a good time for us to report out to you and for you to hear your questions and concerns. And of course, it can be done more frequently if you need it. But yes, thank you very much. Unless anybody else, this is Anthony, this is it, right?
Yes, sir.
And unless some of our Housing Authority members may also have some comments that they want to make. Dan, I want to pass up that opportunity to be together. And if any of them would like to, I know that, they may have some thoughts they want to offer.
Sure. I would encourage any of our 4 or 5 members that are on today, if they have anything else they'd like to add. Not seeing or hearing any. They want to mention again, we have our new member on board, and thank you all for your appointment of Terrell. He brings a strong financial background, and unfortunately we lose George Quick this fall. So he's been our financial person, and Terrell is a CPA and has done auditing and done substantial amount of financial work. So we want to make sure to thank you for that appointment.
I know we'll miss George, and he was the person that negotiated the 100-year repayment of that loan. We had a loan that was due in a very short period of time, and George and Ms. Nottingham and Bo will remember that George went over and negotiated a 100-year repayment. I thought that was well done.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, everybody. Dan, thank you for your leadership of the board, and thank everybody on the Durham Housing Authority board. It's a great board, and you all are doing great things. We are going to do this. This is going to happen. And I'm so pleased about the cooperative relationship that we have and the way in which it's working out. Thanks to my council colleagues for being so incredibly supportive of the Housing Authority also over the last few years. I know we're going to do great things together. So,
Steve, is one more thing I'd just like to say. there was an article last week in the Independent about gentrification in downtown. And I think another side of that could be what we're doing to prevent gentrification. We did not do what some people thought we should have and sell this property downtown because of its value and move our residents into the suburbs of or the outer parts of our community. It was good enough for them to live downtown when things weren't good. So now that they are, we should not be moving our folks out. And that was a commitment the board made and one that Anthony buys 100%. So we're increasing the availability of housing downtown rather than decreasing for people who are low income and people who've traditionally not been served. So I'm proud of what we're doing in that respect. And hopefully the Independent will pick up on the positive aspects of that instead of looking at the negative aspect of what gentrification is doing in downtown area. Thanks.
Yes, agree. And what we're doing on the Durham Housing Authority property and a few of the other properties that the city owns near the bus station, the old police headquarters and so forth, is what is going to provide affordability downtown. The Housing Authority is this property, and what we're doing there through your work is what is going to keep downtown affordable for thousands of people. So that's the only way to do it. And I appreciate that very much, Dan. Well, thank you, everybody. I think we can adjourn and look forward to being together either in a year or whenever we feel it is necessary in the intervening period. And so thank you very much. Thank you, Anthony, and thank you, Reginald, for your reports.
Bye, everybody. Thank you so much.